On Business Incorporated today. The Supreme Court in Nigeria suspends the Naira policy temporarily. We'll take a look at the impact of rising food prices in Africa on the farmers. And Rwanda's export in 2022 was up 40%. Good afternoon. Welcome to Business Incorporated here on Channels Television. I'm Ini John Mekwa. We dive right in, as usual, starting with market numbers in Africa. It's a good one for Nigeria as that market recovered at intraday 0.25%. Remember, yesterday this was down, as well as the JSE of South Africa. Both of them were in the red yesterday at this time. They have recovered at intraday, with JSE looking much better, 79,873.50. We look at other parts of Africa now, starting with Egypt. It's still in the red, 0.71%. And Kenya seems to be losing that bullish run that it's been using for some days now, down almost 1% at the close of trade yesterday, Tuesday. We move over to the Middle East now. Looking at the numbers there, it was mostly negative or evenly spread at the close of trade. No, this is intraday. Abu Dhabi is 0.03%, marginally up. Dubai also, but much better, 0.33% at 3,416.13. Looking at other parts in that region, Saudi Arabia also in the green, 0.08%, while Qatar was in the red at intraday, 0.66%. Let's go over to Europe now and see what's happening there. At stake is Europe's future in industries. Yesterday, we talked about the subsidies connected to electric vehicles and that area or industry. Well, today we're talking about electric vehicles and battery manufacturing, together with access to the raw materials to create those things. France and Germany's economy ministers had talks in Washington to engage with Europe's concerns over subsidies that we discussed yesterday for green technologies under the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. The $370 billion support package will, among other things, subsidize investment in new green technologies, and has EU officials worried that it will undermine their firm's competitiveness on the big North American market. Well, Chris is closer there and joins us now with what's really happening, especially coming from that meeting. Chris, good afternoon. What exactly are the high points of the meeting with the ministers?
France and Germany's economy ministers say they did find a willingness in Washington to engage with Europe's concerns. Nobody on the visitors' side believed that they could undo legislation passed by Congress, the ministers stressed. Instead, this symbolic trip by the duo in charge of Europe's two largest economies was designed to highlight the matter's importance, Germany's Robert Habeck said. After meeting with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, and other White House officials, Mr. Habeck and Bruno Le Maire of France emerged with few specifics other than pledges to be clear about their competing green subsidies. Now, that means that the EU and the US agree that there had to be transparency on the specific subsidies of the US government so that the European Union could match them if necessary. You cannot have any fair competition if there isn't full transparency on the level of public subsidies and tax credit that are granted to private companies. France's Bruno Le Maire said a technical group with members from both sides is to make this transparency work in the future. So the Europeans are trying to sell this meeting as a success. Readouts from US officials were less specific about the outcome and signaled no major concessions. And there are concerns that the United States could be giving up too much ground here. Some lawmakers saying opening the Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits up to European rivals would lessen the competitive advantage they would confer on U.S. companies and limit U.S. investments.
Yeah, so what are the biggest concerns for Germany and France?
It is the fear of falling behind on a market that's going to define large aspects of our future by losing companies and technologies that are likely to shape this very future. The $370 billion Inflation Reduction Act is designed to shelter U.S. companies from the impact of rising prices, as well as subsidize investments in green technologies such as electric vehicles and battery manufacturing, together with access to the raw materials which go into them. And it is this issue that European leaders are viewing with growing anxiety. They fear that the IRA will undermine the prospects of EU firms on the highly important North American market, while Canadian and Mexican companies are eligible to benefit from many of the IRA's provisions. The act does not help European competitors. Now, the EU Commission and member states have also been working on an overhaul of subsidy rules in order to protect European companies and advance the transformation towards a climate neutral economy. That means, on top of handing out subsidies, EU countries are to be enabled to grant tax cuts much more easily to certain industries, something that EU competition law is now making quite difficult at the moment. Also, when granting these aid programs, the volume of similar measures in competing economies like the United States or China is to be considered more. Following this Washington visit, European leaders will hold a summit aimed at crafting a response to the US measures.
Well, I wonder what that response will look like. But let's look at the markets now. How's that faring today?
It is once again Fed Chair Jerome Powell who is setting the tone on markets today. In his speech on Tuesday, he reiterated that disinflation has begun, but warned that Friday's eye-popping U.S. jobs report showed why the battle against inflation will, quote, take quite a bit of time. But Mr. Powell's comments that the economy would need more interest rate hikes to keep inflation on a consistent downward track was not really a deviation from what had already been said, analysts are saying. And markets take that as a positive. The DAX in Frankfurt gaining around 0.7% this morning.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Chris. You can say that again about that comment. Thank you so much, Chris. Well, that comment is obviously moving markets all around the world and even in the metals market. But let's start from Asia, where markets traded mixed, as Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell overnight acknowledged that inflation is declining, a sign that the central bank may soon pause its rate hikes. U.S. features, meanwhile, are mixed. Let's look at the numbers now. With the Nikkei 225 in the red at 0.29%, 27,606.46, and Shanghai Composite also in the red, almost half a percentage at 3.23. 3,223.14. We have the Hang Seng Index also in the red, even though milder than the other, 0.11%, 21,283.5 to Kospi of South Korea. In the green, made it out 1.3%, 2,483.64. And then in Australia, recovering from that yesterday's major red, 0.35% at 7,530.10. That's looking at the Asian market. Let's move over now to the United States, where we do have details from our correspondent, Maria Bird, of Tuesday's trading. But before she comes on, we'd like to tell you that the futures slid this morning, putting Wall Street on track for another red market. There you have it. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down. Index is down 0.15%. S&P 500 also down 0.25%. At the Nasdaq, the tech-heavy Nasdaq, 0.22%. But let's have Maria Bird now with the details of Tuesday's trade.
The U.S. stock market soared on Tuesday as the Dow Jones was up by 0.7%. The S&P 500 jumped by 1.3%, and the heavy tech Nasdaq was up by 1.9%. It is clear that investors were hopeful that the announcement by Chairman Powell in his speech in Washington would also stabilize the economy. It is clear that inflation is beginning to decrease while interest rate hikes are only slightly increasing. It is also clear that many investors are hopeful that the State of the Union address by President Biden will also help to stabilize the economy, which will have a positive impact on the U.S. stock market.
Maria, but it's not just the U.S. stock market. Oil prices rose for a third straight day on Wednesday as investor concern eased about U.S. interest rate hikes. So there you have it again. Another reaction to that Jerome Powell's comment. An industry report has pointed even to a drop in U.S. crude inventories coming from Mr. Powell on Tuesday were seen as less hawkish than feared, boosting risk appetite and weighing on the dollar. A weaker dollar makes oil cheaper for other currency holders. Well, it would appear that traders had become a little more defensive on the expectation of a hawkish shift, but Pearl refrained from taking the leap. And Brent rose 67 cents to $84.36 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures climbed 80 cents to $77.94 a barrel. With less aggressive U.S. rate hikes, the market is hoping the world's biggest economy can dodge a sharp economic slowdown or even a recession that would hit oil demand, while China's reopening after ending COVID curbs also boosted fuel use. In the metals market, gold prices ticked higher on Wednesday as the dollar retreated from a one-month peak after U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell did not revert to a more hawkish stance despite last week's stronger than expected jobs report. Spot gold was up 0.4% to $1,882.56 per ounce. U.S. gold futures firmed at 5% to $1,894.70. Traders are tracking the performance of the dollar and global economic situation to get a direction while awaiting fresh cues. Powell reiterated on Tuesday that inflation was starting to come down, but cautioned last week's blockbuster jobs report showed why battle against inflation will take quite a bit, but interest rates might need to move higher than expected. Well, let's come to Nigeria now, where the International Monetary Fund is advising the Central Bank of Nigeria to postpone the deadline of February 10th for replacing old Naira notes with new ones. The IMF provided the advice in response to difficulties which Nigerians have encountered nationwide during the banknote swap process and disruptions to trade and payments due to the shortage of the new banknotes available to the public. To be recalled that the central bank had moved the deadline from the 31st of January to the 10th of February, which is supposed to be on Friday, as mixed reactions trail the redesign and swap policy. And in what may seem like a reaction to that or not, the Supreme Court of Nigeria has restrained the central bank from implementing the February 10 deadline of the old notes, 200, 500 and 1,000 Naira notes, to stop being a legal tender. 3 northern states governors, Kaduna, Kogi and Zamfara, had in a motion ex parte filed on the 3rd of February prayed the Apex Court to hold the Central Bank of Nigeria redesign policy. A 7-man panel of the Supreme Court, led by Justice John Okoro, in a unanimous ruling granted an interim injunction restraining the federal government, the CBN, commercial banks and others from implementing the February 10 deadline for the old note to stop being a legal tender. The court further held that the federal government, the CBN and deposit banks must not continue with the deadline pending the determination of a notice in respect of the issue on the 15th of February. By this ruling, the old note continues to be a legal tender in Nigeria. And of course, in reaction to this, we've been having some lawyers speak to this judgment. Earlier on our program, our politics program, we had Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Wahab Shitu, speak to this.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Nigerians are hard hit. So I think it makes sense what the Supreme Court has done. And I think Nigerians should now commend the Supreme Court for rising to this occasion, because it's a proactive reaction, which is for the benefit of the people. It also shows that if we do not quickly resolve all of these issues, it might impact negatively on the general elections. Elections are just a few days away. the presidential election, the most important election in the history of our country. You can see the gladiators have campaigned around the country. So we should not do anything that was cut to the election. That is why it's also in the interest of the generality of Nigerians for this policy to be, extended, so that people have access to cash. You're not thinking of people in the urban areas, a lot of people in the rural centers who don't have access to cash, either through the banking system or the POS. So I think a policy must take into account the interests of all Nigerians, so that even if the objective is sound, if the objective is to benefit the economy in the long run, we should also look at the interests of the people who are to take benefit of the policy. And Nigerians are suffering, and I think I should use this opportunity to tell the ruling elite, those in positions of authority, that government exists for the security and welfare of the people. Once that objective is not achieved, then government is not making impact. I think we should tell them that, you see, the Nigerians are cross-board. The high, the low, their interests must be factored into the equation. Government exists to serve the people and not the other way around. And I think people across the divide, people who have voices should speak out, that we should not be treated as slaves in our country.
Trust that there will be more reactions to the Supreme Court's judgment or pronouncement that we've had today. And then, of course, we'll get reactions from the government and the CBN also. But for now, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll discuss, well, food security. Food prices are rising. Are the farmers getting richer? We'll find out after the break here on Business Incorporated in Hiton Channels Television. Welcome back. Still watching Business Incorporated here in Channels Television. Well, the International Monetary Fund has said that staple food prices in sub-Saharan Africa surged by an average of 23.9% between 2020 and 2022, the most since the 2008 global financial crisis. This is commensurate to an 8.5% rise in the cost of a typical food consumption basket. In Nigeria, for example, the prices of both cassava and maize more than doubled, even though they are mainly produced locally. In Ghana, prices for cassava escalated by 78% between 2020 and 2021. And this reflects higher production costs, transport constraints, among other factors. But can we say that farmers are now richer since food costs more? We'll have one farmer, Mr. African Farmer Mogaji, a food security expert, joining us now for this conversation. Mr. African Farmer, good afternoon. So are you guys richer now that we're paying more for food?
Not at all. Not at all. In the last 4 years, it's been a very challenging sector. We've been maneuvering. A handful can say they are leveraging, and those handfuls are not farmers. A farmer is someone that wakes up and all you think about is your farm or across the value chain, your business in agriculture. While the investors are people who put in money and have other things to do. So the farmers are facing more challenges. The investors can count their costs and move out. But generally, across the country, Nigeria, across West Africa precisely, it's not so encouraging, because you can do well this season, and the next season, the policy changes and you're back to square one, irrespective of the opportunities in the sector.
So I don't think the farmers are the middlemen, are they? How do we cut this, this chain to bring the farmers closer to the money? Because if the consumers are paying more, the farmers should feel the impact.
So you see, the conversation around demonizing the middleman doesn't work. Globally, you need the middleman. We need to work more with the middleman. The middleman is also taking loans from banks to be able to buy from the farmers. The middleman, because policymakers don't understand what is happening in the sector now. So they bring in policies that don't work. The middleman stopped being the person that just buys the food and sells to the consumers. The middlemen now have taken funds to invest in logistics. So they buy the trailers, And they also raise funding to give the farmers to buy seed, fertilizers, and chemicals. So the middlemen now are stakeholders, but the policymakers don't understand that. So we demonize the middleman. An aggregator is a middleman. We find good names here. Aggregator is a middleman. Anybody that takes from the farmer to sell to the consumer is a middleman. The middleman is not the issue. It's the policymakers that don't understand what is happening in the sector. What we see with the Naira scarcity is the same thing with planning and implementation in the agri sector. It's just that it never made media like the Naira scarcity. It's the same. The policies have good intention, but implementation is almost zero. So as a sector, we've been facing this. So it's not surprising for most of the people in agribusiness or farming with what we're experiencing with the Naira. Bad implementation, bad, good ideas, good intention without the knowledge always leads to chaos. And we've been having it for a couple of years. But the last 2021 was really challenging because many people have had to retreat, but they've not surrendered. They're waiting for the new administration, which is what is making food expensive now. It's not the flood. I beg to disagree, and I can be challenged on it. It's not the flood. The flood is an excuse. The lack of planning, policies somersaulting, the same way we see policies with the forex is the same way we see policies changing. Like 2020, 2021, we changed policy on corn, and 45 days later we changed it. But the ripple effect lasted for 8 months. So it means that CBN and co have advisors who don't have their ears to the ground, who don't understand this, and so we are having food. And don't forget, the Naira crisis, the food scarcity and the fuel scarcity is going to lead to further food scarcity next week. We've seen lack of fuel, lack of Naira. Wait till next week and we'll be reporting something different.
Wow, that's scary, Mr. African Farmer, saying that. But you said that the farmers are waiting for the next administration. Well, in just about 17 days, they have the opportunity to vote for those who will make up that administration. What are you looking out for? What are the farmers looking out for? What do you want? You've talked about policy somersault, which is not a problem of just this administration. It's been in Nigeria like a normal thing, and we keep talking about it. So what would you be looking out for that you think can make a difference even in the next administration?
One, I know farmers generally and people in the agribusiness sector are looking for an administration that understands the rural people, that understands that the rural economy is the real economy in Nigeria, that understands that we need production is key, as against all the packaging of, you speak English, you bring consultants together, without the farmers producing quality, consistently in the right quantity. Without that happening, we can't have food security in Nigeria. Production is everything, and investing in the structures required is very important. We need the system to work. When I mean the systems, we need NAFDAC to understand that you cannot just ban a chemical because it is banned in Europe and United States, a chemical they've used for 30, 40 years. They've developed new ones, and so they are saying this one is no longer good. Because we are using it and we have not developed something else, we still need to use it. So we need quarantine to be funded so that they can work together. We need the VIO, we need the road safety to really understand how things work. We need an administration that when they come in, they understand that the sector is the value chain. You can't just say go and plant and we'll give you seed, fertilizer, chemicals without bringing the logistics people on board, without bringing the insurance people on board and the market and even the media. So we need people who will call the sector together and listen to them. We've not had the benefit of listening administrations over the years.
All right, Mr. African Farmer, I do hope that the farmers, as you say, are watching and will vote according to these needs that you have listed. Thank you so much. And I wish you the very best as we go out there to choose the members of the next administration.
Thank you. Farmers will choose right for the first time.
All right, just before we go, the value of Rwandan exports increased by 39.4% in 2022. That's according to figures from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. The good performance for Rwanda's export base was mainly driven by the increase in volume in what the country exported between January and November 2022 and good market prices on the international market for the country's major exports. The value for Rwanda's coffee export increased by 40%. That's just an example, while the value of minerals grew by over 42%. Congratulations to Rwanda. Hope they do it again this year, 2023. That's where we draw the curtains on Business Incorporated today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. We'll do it again on Thursday. I'm Edie John Mekwa. Enjoy the rest of your working day.